The grandfather clock in my study showed 3:47 a.m. when my phone rang. At 72 years old, you learned that calls at this hour never bring good news. My hand trembled as I reached for it, half asleep, half terrified. The number was blocked. Hello. Silence, then breathing, ragged and desperate. Dad. The voice was weak, barely a whisper. Dad, please, I need you to open the door. I'm so cold. My blood turned to ice. That voice, I knew that voice better than my own. Thomas, I whispered, my throat closing. Thomas, is that you? Please, Dad, just open the door. The line went dead. I sat frozen in my leather chair, the phone still pressed against my ear. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. Thomas had been dead for 4 years. 4 years, 3 months, and 16 days. I'd counted every single one. My son had died in a boating accident on Lake Superior. They never found his body. The Coast Guard said the currents there were brutal, unforgiving. They'd found his jacket, his wallet, his shoes on the boat. But Thomas himself was gone, swallowed by that cold, dark water. And now he was calling me, asking me to open the door. A wave of nausea hit me. Was this a dream? A cruel trick of my grief-stricken mind? I looked around the study, at the shelves lined with his childhood photos. Thomas at 6 with a missing front tooth. Thomas at 16 holding up a trophy. Thomas at 25, my brilliant, kind-hearted boy, standing right here in this room, smiling. The pain was a physical thing, a hollowed-out space in my chest that never healed. I pinched my arm, hard. The pain was sharp, real. I was awake. Then, a sound. Not from the phone. From the house. A faint tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the front hallway. From the heavy oak door that led to the wraparound porch. It was the sound of knuckles brushing against wood. A soft, hesitant knocking. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted to escape. Logic screamed at me. This was impossible. It had to be a prank, a mustigiao, sick, twisted joke played by someone who knew my pain. But what if by some miracle, some astronomical divine fluke, what if the lake had given him back? The thought, fragile and desperate, shattered all reason. I pushed myself up from the chair, my old bones protesting. I shuffled out of the study through the dark living room, guided only by the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. The tapping had stopped. The silence was even worse. I reached the front door, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. My breath fogged in the cold air of the hallway. The heating was on, but a deep, penetrating chill was seeping through the doorframe. Thomas? I called out, my voice cracked and feeble. Son? No answer. With a shuddering breath, I turned the lock. The click echoed in the silence. I grasped the cold brass handle, turned it, and pulled the heavy door open. The porch was empty, but the cold, it was a wall of ice, a winter that didn't belong to this autumn. Night. And there, on the welcome mat, laid a single item, a small, waterlogged, faded blue baseball cap, the one I'd bought for him at his first major league game when he was 10 years old, the one he was wearing in a picture on my mantle, the one that was lost with him in Lake Superior. I bent down, my knees popping, and picked it up. It was damp, cold as death itself, and smelled of mildew and lake water. Stitched on the front, the team logo was barely visible, but I knew every thread. This was his. This was real. I looked out into the night, at the empty driveway, the silent trees. Thomas, I yelled, the sound raw and tearing from my throat. Only the wind answered, whistling through the pines. Back inside, door locked, cap in hand, I felt the world tilt. Grief had been my companion for 4 years. Now, it was replaced by something else. A consuming, terrifying hope. question that screamed in my skull. If that was truly my son on the phone, if he was alive, where had he been for 4 years? And who, in God's name, had told me he was dead? The blue cap sat on my desk like an accusation. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Dawn broke, painting the sky in weak, gray streaks, doing nothing to warm the chill that had settled in my bones. I spent those hours in a frantic, silent turmoil. The phone call replayed in my mind, a broken record of a voice I'd mourned. The touch of that damp fabric was a brand on my memory. My first instinct was to call the police. But what would I say? My son, who you declared dead, called me. Also, his wet hat appeared. They'd nod with polite concern, suggest grief counseling, maybe send a board officer to take a statement. They'd seen an old man lost in his delusions. No, I couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. Not until I had something solid, something that couldn't be explained away. I needed to start at the beginning, the accident. I went to the mahogany cabinet in the corner, the one that held the archives of my greatest pain, the official folder. I hadn't opened it in 3 years. Inside were the cold, clinical reports. The Coast Guard summary: single occupant vessel, evidence of sudden weather shift, personal effects recovered, no body located, presumed deceased. There were photos of the empty boat, adrift, pictures of his recovered belongings laid out on a dock, his leather wallet warped and ruined, his favorite sneakers, and the witness statements. This was the part I'd skimmed, too anguished to dwell on at the time. The statements were from the other 2 people on the lake that day who saw the storm roll in. One was from a fisherman named Arlo, who gave a brief account of seeing a small boat struggling before losing sight of it. The other was from my son's best friend, his business partner, the man who had identified the recovered items. Elijah. He had been the one to call me that terrible afternoon, his voice breaking. "Sir, there's been an accident. The weather turned. We got separated. I can't find him." He had been the one to organize the search, to liaise with the Coast Guard, to hold my arm at the memorial service when my legs gave way. He had been a rock, a second son to me in the years that followed, checking in weekly, helping manage the finances Thomas had left behind. A constant, comforting presence. A sick feeling, different from grief, began to stir in my gut. Elijah was the last person to see Thomas alive. They'd taken their boats out separately that day, a common thing for them, to test some new navigation equipment for their marine tech startup. He wanted to go farther out, Elijah had said, tears in his eyes. I told him not to. I told him the forecast was bad. But Thomas, he was so determined. I stared at Elijah's signed statement. It was detailed, heartfelt, perfectly portraying the image of a devastated friend. At the time, it was a testament to their bond. Now, in the pale morning, light. With the phantom of my son's voice in my ears, the words looked different. They looked practiced. I needed to see him. I needed to look into his eyes. I called him. He answered on the second ring, voice warm with concern. "Sir, is everything okay? You're up early." I had a bad night, Elijah. Bad dream about Thomas. I kept my voice frail, old. It wasn't hard. "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry. Those nights are the worst. Do you want me to come over? I can bring some coffee." "That would be kind. Thank you." An hour later, his SUV crunched on the gravel driveway. I watched from the window as he got out. Elijah, now 34, handsome, successful. He'd built their startup, Aquasphere, into a thriving business after Thomas's passing, he said, in Thomas's honor. He carried a tray with 2 coffees and a paper bag from my favorite bakery. The perfect attentive surrogate son. I met him at the door, forcing a thin smile. Come in, come in. Sorry to drag you. Over here. Never a drag, sir, he said, stepping inside. His eyes, sharp and blue, swept the hallway, the living room. They lingered for a fraction of a second on my study door, which was ajar. Did they flicker to the desk? To the blue cap I had not moved? Or was my paranoia painting pictures? We sat in the living room. He handed me a coffee. So, a dream about Thomas? Want to talk about it? It was so real, I said, letting my hand shake slightly as I lifted the cup. He was calling for me. He said he was cold. So very cold. Elijah's face softened with a sympathy that seemed genuine. The mind plays cruel tricks when we miss someone, sir. After my dad passed, I heard his voice for months in empty rooms. This was different, I insisted, watching him closely. It felt present. He reached over and patted my hand. The line between memory and the present can blur, especially at our age. He said it gently, but the phrase, "at our age," stung. It was a boundary, a reminder that I was the old, confused one. We talked a little more about nothing important. Then, as he was getting ready to leave, I played my card, a weak old man's whim. Elijah, before you go, would you mind helping me with something in the study? That old filing cabinet is stuck, and I wanted to look at Thomas's insurance papers again. The lawyer's asking for something. It was a lie. The policy had been settled years ago. A shadow passed behind his eyes. Quick, there and gone. Was it irritation, concern, alarm? Of course, he said smoothly. Let's take a look. In the study, I gestured vaguely to the cabinet. He knelt, jiggled the drawer. Seems fine to me, sir. Must be my old strength failing, I mumbled. As he stood, his eyes landed on the desk, on the blue cap. He froze. His face lost all its practiced warmth. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving 2 white spots. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Where did you get that? He asked, his voice tight, stripped of its usual smooth cadence. This old thing? Found it in a box in the attic yesterday. Buried under some winter clothes, brought back a flood of memories. I kept my tone light, nostalgic. He didn't buy it. He couldn't tear his eyes away. It looks like the one he lost. Yes, it does, doesn't it? I said, picking it up. I held it out to him. Feel it. Still damp from the attic moisture, I suppose. He recoiled, actually took a step back. He wouldn't touch it. No, that's... I have to go, sir. Suddenly I remembered a meeting. I'm sorry. He was already moving, his gait stiff, back toward the hallway. Elijah, is everything all right? Fine. He called over his shoulder, already at the door. I'll call you later. The front door slammed shut. The house was silent again, but now the silence was screaming with truth. Elijah's reaction wasn't that of a man seeing a sad memento. It was the reaction of a man seeing a ghost, a piece of evidence that should have been at the bottom of a lake. My grief, my confusion, crystallized into one sharp, clear, and terrifying emotion. Rage. Someone had lied to me. Someone had stolen 4 years of my son's life and 4 years of my peace. And Elijah, my son's best friend, the man I'd trusted like family, was knee-deep in the lie. The hunt was no longer for a ghost, it was for the truth, and my target was now clear. But I was a 72-year-old man, slow, frail, alone. How does an old wolf hunt a young, powerful, and guilty one? You don't run with the pack. You become smarter. You become silent. You become a shadow in the very den of the liar. The slamming door didn't just shut Elijah out. It sealed me into a new reality. The comforting world of grief was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp landscape of betrayal. I was no longer a mourning father. I was a detective in my own tragedy, and the prime suspect had just fled my living room. My first move was one of pure, calculated stealth. While Elijah's car was still fading down the road, I was on the phone to a different kind of friend, not a social one. A retired man named Gerald, who ran a humble electronics repair shop in town. He was a genius with gadgets, a quiet, observant soul who owed me a favor from a time when a bank loan I'd co-signed for his shop had saved his business. I asked him for two things: a high-quality, voice-activated digital recorder and a very basic, prepaid burner phone. No questions asked. He delivered them to my doorstep that afternoon in an unmarked bag. Next, I had to become a student of my enemy. For 4 years, I'd seen Elijah as a source of comfort. Now, I began to reconstruct his life as a source of deception. I started with what I knew: Aquasphere, the marine technology company he and Thomas had founded. Thomas had been the engineering visionary, the creator. Elijah was the businessman, the face, the deal maker. After Thomas's death, Elijah had taken full control. The company had soared, landing major government contracts for underwater surveillance systems. Elijah lived in a modern glass and steel house on the bluffs, drove a luxury car, was featured in business magazines. He'd done very, very well. Too well. I spent the day at the public library, using their computers. My own knowledge of the digital world was basic, but I knew how to search. I looked up news articles about Aquasphere's big breakthrough contract. It was awarded by the Department of Maritime Security just 6 months after Thomas's disappearance. The article quoted Elijah saying, "This innovation was my late partner's dream. I'm just seeing it through for him." A beautiful sentiment, a lucrative one. I searched for the patent records for Aquasphere's core technology, a sonar array system that could map ocean floors with unprecedented detail. The primary patent was filed 1 week before Thomas's accident. The listed inventors, Thomas and Elijah. But a footnote mentioned an earlier provisional patent filed a year prior. I dug deeper, my old fingers clumsy on the keyboard. That provisional filing was in Thomas's name alone. A thought, dark and ugly, formed. What if the invention was more Thomas's than Elijah's? What if Elijah saw not a partnership, but a kingdom he would only ever be prince to? What if a 50% share of a dream wasn't enough for him? What if he wanted it all? But that was the motive. It wasn't proof, and it didn't explain the phone call. It didn't explain the hat. That night, I prepared. I placed the voice-activated recorder under the side table by my favorite armchair in the living room, concealed by a drape of fabric. The burner phone was charged and hidden in my bedroom. My plan was simple: get Elijah back in this house and get him talking. I called him the next morning. He sounded hesitant, guarded. "Sir, how are you holding up?" "Not well, Elijah," I said, pouring every ounce of brokenness into my voice. "I can't stop thinking about that hat. It stirred everything up. The memories, they're so vivid. I feel like I'm losing my grip. I think I need to see someone, a therapist. But I wanted to ask you first, would you come with me to help me explain about the accident? I get so confused with the details now." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. It appealed to his ego. He was the expert on the tragedy. It played on his continued need to appear the devoted friend. And it framed me as a weakening, non-threatening old man, heading toward professional help that would ultimately dismiss my delusions. He couldn't refuse. He arrived that evening, his demeanor softer, but with a watchful tension in his shoulders. I had the hat placed prominently on the coffee table. I offered him a drink, a scotch, his favorite. He accepted. I took my usual armchair, right next to the hidden recorder. We made small talk. I let my sentences trail off, repeated myself, played the part of a mind slipping into fog. I saw his guard lower, inch by inch. The pity in his eyes was real. He believed the act. Then I guided the conversation into the past. "You know, I was thinking about that day," I said, my gaze distant. "You said you were in your boat, and he was in his. But the lake, it's so big. How did you know where to even start looking for him?" Elijah took a long sip of scotch. "We had agreed on a grid pattern for testing, sir. Standard procedure. When the storm hit, I headed for the coordinates we'd last shared. That's where I found his boat. Drifting, empty. And his things? They were just there." He nodded, his eyes on the amber liquid in his glass. Just there. As if he'd just stepped off for a moment. The wallet on the seat, the shoes by the helm, the jacket. It was snagged on the railing. Something in his recounting was too neat, too staged. "His hat," I said softly, pointing to the faded blue cap. "You never mentioned his hat being found." Elijah's glass stopped halfway to his lips. He looked from the cap to me. It wasn't with the other items. It must have blown away." "But he loved that hat," I pressed, my voice a frail thread. "He always wore it on the water. For luck," he said. "You remember?" "Of course I remember," Elijah said, an edge of impatience cutting through his sympathy. "But the wind was fierce, sir. It could have gone anywhere." He set his glass down with a definitive click. "This is why you need to talk to a professional. This fixation on small details, it's not healthy. It's like you're trying to rewrite what happened." "Maybe I am," I whispered, looking down at my hands. "Maybe I just need to understand why." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost pleading tone. "Sir, there is no why. It was a tragedy, a random, awful accident. Thomas is gone. You have to accept that. For your own sake. This searching in the past, holding on to objects." He gestured dismissively at the cap. "It's keeping you trapped. You need to let him go. We all need to let him go." There it was, the message. Let him go. Not just comfort, a directive. The subtext was screaming, "Stop digging." I let a single tear trace its way down my wrinkled cheek. A perfect, silent answer. He bought it. He finished his scotch, stood, and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I'll make an appointment with a good doctor I know. I'll handle everything. You just rest." After he left, I waited in the silent dark for an hour. Then I retrieved the recorder. My heart thundered as I pressed play. The quality was crisp. I heard our entire conversation. I listened to his smooth explanations, his controlled narrative. And then I heard it again, the part about the hat. It must have blown away. But in the background, on the recording, just as he said those words, there was a faint, distinct sound I hadn't noticed in the room. A sharp, metallic click. The sound of a lighter. Elijah didn't smoke. Never had. Thomas did. Thomas had a particular old Zippo lighter with a sailing ship engraved on it, a habit Elijah always chided him for. My blood ran cold. The sound was on the recording, meaning it came from the room, but neither of us had made it. It was as if a ghost had been listening with us. flicking a flame to life at the mention of the lost hat. Or the sound hadn't come from the room at all. It had come from Elijah's person, a tiny, subconscious tell. A nervous habit he'd picked up from 4 years living with a terrible secret? Or was it something else? A keepsake? A trophy? The web was more tangled than I'd imagined. Elijah was lying. He was afraid of the past resurfacing. But the phone call, the visceral, desperate voice of my son, that implied something far more immediate than a 4-year-old crime. That implied a present-tense horror. Elijah knew something, but I was starting to fear he wasn't the only spider in this web. The call felt like a cry from a prison, not a grave. And if Thomas was in a prison, who were the other jailers? I looked out at the night. Somewhere out there, my son was cold, and I had just baited a trap with my own weakness. The game was in motion. The old wolf had begun to stalk. The click of the lighter on the recording was a key turning in a rusted lock. It didn't just point to Elijah's guilt. It screamed of an intimacy with Thomas's life, an intimacy that had twisted into something dark. He was carrying a piece of my son, a nervous tick stolen from a dead man. It was a violation that made my skin crawl. But I couldn't confront him. Not yet. He was stronger, smarter in the ways of the modern world, and he was warned. I had to find a lever, a pressure point. Everyone has them. Even a successful, seemingly untouchable man like Elijah. I thought about his life. His public life was an open book, charity galas, business accolades, the handsome bachelor. But what about the private one? The one that existed before Thomas's disappearance? There was one person who had been there from the very beginning, even before me. The caretaker of the old Lake Superior cabin Elijah's family owned. A grizzled, silent man named Jericho. Jericho was in his late 60s, a Vietnam vet who lived alone year-round at the remote property, a man of few words and fierce loyalty to the family who employed him for decades. Thomas and Elijah had used that cabin as a base for their early lake experiments. If there was a secret buried out there, Jericho might be the ground it was buried in. Visiting him directly was out of the question. Elijah would hear about it within the hour. I needed a proxy, and I knew just the person, Maggie. She ran the only diner in the nearest town, to the lake, a 30-mile drive from the cabin. For 40 years, she'd been serving pies and coffee and listening to everything. She also happened to be the cousin of Gerald, the electronics repairman. A tenuous connection, but in a small community, connections are everything. Using the burner phone, I called Gerald. I didn't explain why. I simply asked if Maggie might be willing to do a favor for an old friend, to keep her ears open the next time Jericho came in for his weekly supply run, and to casually mention how hard it must be, maintaining such a big place for Mr. Elijah all by himself, especially with all the strange comings and goings lately. Strange comings and goings? Gerald repeated, puzzled. Just have her say it, Gerald. Please, it's important. 2 days later, the burner phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Maggie. The message was brief. Jericho in today. Tense. When I mentioned comings and goings, he spilled coffee, said, "Ain't my business what the boss does with his other place." Wouldn't say another word. Left in a hurry, his other place. Elijah only had one property, the family cabin. At least, that's what everyone knew. What everyone, including me, had always believed. A new chilling possibility opened up. What if the accident on Lake Superior wasn't an accident, but a diversion? A staged disappearance? What if Thomas wasn't dead, but had been taken somewhere? Somewhere Elijah controlled another place. The thought was so monstrous, it stole my breath. To keep a man prisoner for 4 years? To orchestrate such an elaborate lie? The scale of the evil was incomprehensible. But the voice on the phone, it hadn't sounded like a memory. It had sounded like a plea from the here and now. I needed to find that other place. But how? I was an old man tethered to his home. I couldn't trail Elijah. I couldn't hack databases. My strength was patience, observation, and the one thing Elijah had underestimated: my absolute, unwavering love for my son. I decided to watch the only thing I could, Elijah's public persona. I created a fake social media profile, a generic name, and followed Aquasphere and Elijah. I studied every post, every tagged photo, every business announcement. For days, it was just glossy corporate news. Then, I saw it. A post from 2 weeks ago. Aquasphere had donated a decommissioned research vessel to a maritime historical society for restoration. The photo showed Elijah, smiling, handing over a large, symbolic key. In the background, moored at a different dock, was a sleek, modern private yacht. Its name was visible on the stern, the Aqueous, a yacht, a mobile, private, completely controlled other place. Could it be that simple? Could my son be held on a boat, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to raise suspicion? I combed through every photo of Elijah near water I could find, and several from charity regattas or business trips to coastal cities. The Aqueous was in the background. It was his floating trophy, his signature. I needed to know where it was right now. Maritime vessels had transponders, AIS signals that could be tracked. Such data was available on specialist websites, but it was a maze of technical information. I needed help again. But this time, I couldn't go through Gerald. This was entering dangerous waters. I remembered a young man, Kieran, who used to mow my lawn as a teenager. He was a shy, brilliant kid, obsessed with computers and ships. He'd gone on to study marine logistics. I found him online. He now worked for the Port Authority. I called his office, hoping he'd remember the old man who always paid him double, and listened to him talk about ocean liners. He did. "Mr. Alder, is that really you? How are you, sir?" "I'm well, Kieran, thank you." "Listen, I have a strange request. It's a bit of a hobby project. I'm writing a local history piece about private vessels on the Great Lakes. A friend of mine, Elijah, has a beautiful yacht called the Aqueous. I wanted to surprise him by including its current location in the piece. You know, currently cruising near such and such. Makes it feel current. Is there any way you could look up its recent AIS data for me? Just the last known location?" I held my breath. It was a flimsy story, but I was banking on nostalgia and my harmless old man persona. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the click of a keyboard. "Well, it's not strictly public data for private vessels unless they're in a port, but for you, sir, I can take a quick look. No promises." More typing. "Okay, here it is. The Aqueous. It's interesting. Its transponder has been intermittent, but the last solid ping was 3 days ago, at a private mooring in Presque Isle Bay, up in Michigan. But before that, it was off-grid for almost 2 weeks. That's unusual. Most owners keep their transponders on. For safety. Presque Isle. Remote. Isolated. Perfect. Thank you, Kieran. You've been a great help." "Sure thing, Mr. Alder. Hey, is everything okay? You sound different." "Just tired, son. Just tired of the past." It was the truest thing I'd said. I hung up. I had a location, a yacht, a prison on the water, and a desperate, cold son who had somehow, miraculously, briefly, reached out. But now came the impossible part. How does a 72-year-old man from the suburbs launch a rescue mission on a guarded yacht hundreds of miles away? I had no resources, no army, just a burning, furious love, and a lifetime of knowing my child. Then I looked at the blue cap on my desk, and I thought of the phone call. "Dad, open the door." He hadn't said, "Come find me." He'd said, "Open the door," as if he knew where I was, as if he believed I was right there. A wild, desperate idea began to form. What if the call wasn't just a cry for help? What if it was a message, a piece of a code only a father and son would understand? Thomas was an engineer. He thought in systems, in patterns. When he was a boy, we played a game. When he was scared at night, he'd call out not for me to come to his room, but to open the door. It was our signal. It meant he was coming to me. He was leaving his dark room and running down the hall to the safety of mine. Open the door. He wasn't telling me to open my front door. He was telling me he was coming to a door. His door. Wherever he was being held, he was planning an escape. And he was telling me to be ready to let him in. The call wasn't the start of his plea. It was the culmination of a plan. My son wasn't just a victim. He was trying to fight his way home. And he needed to know his father was waiting. But waiting where? He couldn't come here. Elijah would be watching. He'd go to the one place he associated with ultimate safety with me. The place from our game. Not my current house, our old family cottage, 50 miles north, on a smaller lake. The place we went every summer until he was 16. The place with the red door. We'd sold it years ago, but the memory was etched in both our souls. It was a leap of faith so vast, it felt like madness. But it was the only thread I had. My son, if he was alive, was an engineer solving a problem, and he was trying to communicate the solution to me. I had to go to the red door. I had to be there. But I couldn't just go. Elijah would be monitoring me, especially now. I had to disappear. It was time for the old wolf to leave his den and become a ghost. Disappearing at my age, with my resources, required theater. I had to stage a breakdown, a final, convincing collapse into senility that would make Elijah sigh with relief and hopefully look away. The next morning, I called him, my voice a frantic, trembling mess. "Elijah, it's happening again. The calls, in the middle of the night." His voice, he's crying. He's so cold. He's saying the same thing. I was sobbing, the sounds ugly and raw. I can't take it. I can't live like this. "Sir, calm down. Breathe. I'm coming right over." "No, don't come. I can't see anyone. I'm going away. I'm checking myself into that place, that hospice by the river. The quiet one. I need silence. I need them to make the voices stop." I named a real, reputable palliative care facility known for its discretion. I've already called them. They're sending a car. Don't try to stop me, Elijah. It's for the best. "Sir, that's a drastic step. Let me help you." "You've helped enough," I screamed, then let my voice break into whimpers. Just let me go. Promise me you'll look after the house. Promise me." A long silence. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. The old man was finally breaking. He was checking himself into a quiet facility where they would medicate him and dismiss his fantasies. It was the perfect, permanent solution to his problem. I promise, sir," he said, his voice dripping with manufactured sorrow. "I'll take care of everything. You get the rest you need." An hour later, a car from a private livery service, not the hospice, arrived. I'd paid in cash, booked under a false name. I got in with a small bag, making sure my movements were visible from the street. As the car pulled away, I slumped in the seat, playing my part until we were out of the neighborhood. Then I sat up. "Change of plan," I told the driver. "Take me to the long-term parking at the Amtrak station." From there, it was a symphony of misdirection. A train ticket purchased with cash to a city 3 states away. A switch at a busy bus station to a different bus line heading back in the general direction of the old cottage. I paid for everything with the stack of emergency cash I'd kept in a home safe for decades. I became a gray man in a baseball cap and sunglasses, invisible in the crowd. 36 hours after leaving my house, I was standing in the overgrown woods behind the old lake cottage. It looked smaller, sadder. The paint was peeling, and the red door, I remembered, was now a faded burgundy. My heart ached with 1,000 memories. Teaching Thomas to fish off the dock, reading on the porch swing, the smell of pine and lake water. The current owners were away, a fact I'd confirmed with a call to a local realtor pretending to be interested in buying. The place was dark, silent. This was the gamble, the leap of faith. Had Thomas truly meant this door? Was he even capable of getting here? Or was I a deluded old man standing in the woods, waiting for a ghost? I used the hidden key, still under the same false rock by the back steps, a secret Thomas would remember. I let myself in. The interior smelled of dust and closed-up spaces. I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the old living room armchair, the one that used to be mine, facing the red door, and I waited. The first night passed. Nothing. The silence was absolute, broken only by the call of loons on the lake. Doubt was a corrosive acid. Had I misread everything? Was Elijah's guilt just about money and the phone call a cruel, random hoax? I clutched the blue cap in my pocket like a rosary. The second day, I ate sparingly from the supplies I'd brought. I watched the door. I listened. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. Then, on the second night, just after 2 a.m., I heard it. Not a phone, not a voice. A sound outside, a furtive, scraping sound near the front of the house. Then, a soft, hesitant tap on the red door. My entire body went rigid. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Tap, tap. Then, a voice. Hoarse, ruined, barely recognizable, but woven into the very fiber of my soul. "Dad?" It was him. It was Thomas. I stumbled to the door, my vision blurring with tears. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers numb. I yanked the door open, and there he was. My son. 4 years older, but aged a lifetime. He was gaunt, skeletal, wrapped in a filthy, thin blanket over what looked like oil-stained work clothes. His hair was long and matted, his beard wild. He was shivering violently, his lips blue. But his eyes were Thomas's eyes. Wide, intelligent, filled with a pain so deep it seemed to swallow the night. And in them, a flicker of the boy who used to run to this door. You came," he rasped. And then his legs buckled. I caught him. He weighed nothing. He was ice cold. I dragged him inside, kicked the door shut, and lowered him to the floor by the fireplace. I wrapped him in every blanket I could find, my hands frantically feeling his face, his arms, as if to confirm he was flesh and bone. "Thomas, my boy, my son." The words were sobs. He looked up at me, tears cutting paths through the grime on his cheeks. He kept me on the boat, the engine room. I found a phone, an old satellite phone he'd forgotten, one charge. I knew the signal would trace to the house. I had to make you understand. to come here. Shh, don't talk. You're safe. You're here. No, he choked, gripping my arm with shocking strength. Not safe. He'll know I'm gone by morning. He'll come looking. He'll check here. He knows about this place. The fear in his voice was animal, primal. This wasn't over. We had escaped nothing. We had simply entered the final act. For the next hour, as I tried to warm him with soup from a thermos, the story spilled out in broken fragments. The accident had been an ambush. Elijah had met him on the water, forced him at gunpoint onto the aqueous, scuttled his boat with the personal items left behind to stage the scene. Thomas, the genius, was more valuable alive. He was the only one who could troubleshoot the core aquasphere technology, which had a fatal flaw Elijah hadn't understood. Elijah had kept him as a slave in the yacht's bowels, forcing him to work, to perfect the systems that were making Elijah a fortune. The intermittent AIS signal? Those were the times Elijah took the yacht offshore, to places where no one could hear the hammering from the engine room. The contract, the big one, Thomas whispered, his teeth chattering. It's for a government fleet. The flaw, it causes a cascading system failure under pressure. The ships, they could sink. He doesn't care. He just wants the money. I kept sabotaging my own fixes, buying time. But he got suspicious. He was going to dispose of me after the final test next week. I had to run. He described a harrowing escape during a supply stop at the Presque Isle mooring. He'd slipped overboard, swum through freezing water, stolen a bicycle, and traveled for days, living off stolen scraps, guided only by the desperate hope that I'd understood his message. I held him, rocking, him like a child, a storm of fury and heartbreak raging inside me. My gentle son, treated like a machine, kept in the dark and cold for 4 years. We'll go to the police, I said, my voice steel. Now, we'll tell them everything. Thomas shook his head weakly. His reach, the contracts, the officials. He'll have a story. I look like a madman. He'll say I had a breakdown, that I've been in hiding, that I'm trying to extort him. Without proof. It's his word against mine. And he owns the word. He was right. Elijah had spent 4 years building a fortress of lies and influence. We had a testimony, but we needed irrefutable evidence. We needed to trap the trapper. As dawn tinged the sky gray, a plan formed in my mind. Not a young man's plan of force, but an old man's plan of cunning. We had one advantage Elijah didn't. We knew he was coming. And we had the one thing he wanted most. The genius behind his empire. Now free. He's going to come. Here, Thomas, I said softly. And when he does, we're going to be ready. We're going to make him confess to the world. I looked at my son, my heart breaking at the fear in his eyes. But for this to work, you have to be strong one more time. You have to face him. Can you do that? Thomas looked at the red door, then back at me. In his eyes, the flicker of the boy was gone, replaced by the hardened survivor. He nodded slowly. For you, Dad. And for me. I can do it. The stage was set. The old cottage, the site of our happiest memories, was about to become the courtroom for our vengeance. The bait was in place. Now, we just had to wait for the wolf to come to the door. The fragile hours after Thomas's arrival were a blur of quiet urgency. Fear was a constant companion, scratching at the windows, but it was now joined by a fierce, focused energy. We were no longer prey. We were architects. Thomas, despite his exhaustion, his body racked with shivers that wouldn't stop, became a strategist. The engineer's mind, suppressed for so long, began to work again. He'll come alone, he whispered, sipping hot sweet tea. He won't risk anyone else hearing this. He'll see your car isn't at the hospice. He'll track your phone. I left it at the facility, in the care package I gave the driver to drop off, I said. A cheap, old phone of mine, turned off, a breadcrumb leading to a dead end. Thomas managed a ghost of a smile. It was heartbreaking. Good. Then he'll have only one other place to look. Here. He thinks I'm broken. He thinks you're broken. He'll come to clean up the mess himself. Our plan was simple, but its success hinged on two things: Elijah's arrogance and technology. My old friend Gerald came through once more, though he didn't know it. In my bag, along with supplies, were the items I'd asked for days ago: 2 more voice-activated recorders and a small, internet-connected camera used for watching. Bird feeders. It was battery-powered, motion-activated, and could stream to a private online account. While Thomas rested, I worked. I placed one recorder under the couch. I placed another in the old brick fireplace, nestled behind a log. The camera was more delicate. I positioned it on a high shelf in a corner of the living room, nestled among dusty knickknacks, its lens giving a wide view of the room's center and the red door. Its green power light was a tiny eye in the shadows. I connected it to my burner phone's hotspot, set up the streaming link, and tested it. On the small screen, I could see the whole room. It worked. Thomas watched me, his eyes hollow but alert. When he comes? What's the play? The play, I said, sitting beside him, is the truth. His truth. We let him believe he's won. We let him talk. We let him boast. You are the key, son. You are the wound that will make him bleed his secrets. We rehearsed, not lines, but emotions. Thomas's role was to be defeated, terrified, the broken prisoner. Mine was to be the confused, helpless old father, finally accepting the reality Elijah would sell us. We would give him the stage, and he, in his supreme confidence, would perform his own confession. The day passed in a nerve-wracking limbo. Every creak of the old cottage, every rustle of leaves outside, sent jolts of adrenaline through us. Thomas slept fitfully. I kept watch, my eyes glued to the camera feed on the phone, which showed nothing but the still, sun-dappled living room. Dusk fell, painting the lake in shades of orange and purple, a cruel parody of peace. Then, as full dark settled, the camera's motion sensor triggered. A pair of headlights sliced through the trees, then went dark. A car door opened and closed with a soft thump. A figure approached the cottage, visible as a dark shape through the window. He didn't knock. He tried the handle. Finding it locked, he moved to the side window, used a tool, and with a sharp crack, the old latch gave way. He was inside within seconds. Elijah stood in the living room, silhouetted against the moonlight from the window. He looked exactly as he always did, well-dressed in a dark jacket, calm, in control. He scanned the room, his gaze passing over the shelf with the camera, seeing nothing. Then his eyes found us. I was in the armchair, a blanket over my legs, pretending to doze. Thomas was curled on the floor by the hearth, the very picture of a recaptured runaway. Elijah let out a long, slow sigh. It wasn't one of relief. It was the sound of a man facing a tedious but necessary task. "Sir," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "I'm so disappointed. The hospice said you never arrived." I pretended to startle awake, blinking owlishly. "Elijah." "What? How did you find us?" "Where else would you go?" he said, a sad smile on his lips. He walked further in, his eyes locked on Thomas. "And you, after everything I've done for you, given you shelter, protected you from yourself, And this is how you repay me? By frightening your sick old father with your delusions? Thomas flinched, curling tighter. It wasn't entirely an act. Delusions? I croaked. He told me things, Elijah. Terrible things. Of course he did, Elijah said, kneeling down so he was at our level, a pastor tending to his flock. He's been unwell for a long time, sir. Since before the accident. The pressure, the genius. It cracked him. The accident wasn't an accident. It was a suicide attempt. He called me ranting, saying he was going to sink the boat. I raced to find him. When I got there, he was in the water, hysterical. I pulled him onto my yacht. He begged me. He said if the world thought he was dead, the pressure would stop. He could just disappear. The lie was breathtaking in its elegance and cruelty. It painted him as a savior, and Thomas as a mentally unstable liar. I saw Thomas's jaw clench, a muscle ticking in his gaunt cheek. He wanted to be dead, I whispered, playing my part. He needed peace, Elijah said softly, putting a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Thomas recoiled as if burned. Elijah's hand stayed, a possessive clamp. I provided it, a place to live, quietly, away from the world. I funded his care. I protected the family name. I built his company into what he dreamed it could be. All for him. And in his episodes, like this one, he twists it all into some kind of dungeon fantasy. It's the illness talking, sir. You have to believe me. He looked at me, his eyes wide with earnest pain. It was a masterclass in manipulation. For a second, even knowing the truth, I felt a sliver of doubt. That's how good he was. But the phone call, I stammered. A stolen satellite phone, Elijah said, shaking his head with pity. He's clever, even in his madness. He used it to feed his fantasy, to pull you into it. I'm so sorry you were subjected to that. He stood up, brushing imaginary dust from his trousers. It's over now. I'm here to take him back to his proper care facility. A better one, with more security. And for you, sir, I think it's time you moved into assisted living. Clearly, living alone isn't safe. You're vulnerable to these fantasies. The final piece of his plan was revealed. Not just to recage Thomas, but to cage me too. To silence us both permanently, legally, with paperwork and doctor's orders. The sheer, cold efficiency of his evil was staggering. This was the moment. The trap was set. The recordings were running. The camera was watching. We had to flip the script. I let my frail, confused facade drop. I sat up straight, and the blanket fell from my shoulders. I looked him dead in the eye, and my voice, when it came, was not the voice of a broken old man. It was the voice of a father whose love had been forged into a weapon. You're right, Elijah. It is over. The change in my demeanor confused him. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Thomas uncurled from the floor. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up to stand beside my chair. He was trembling, but he held his head high. The broken prisoner was gone. In his place stood a man staring down his jailer. The illness, Elijah? Thomas said, his voice still rough but clear as a bell. The only sickness here is your greed. You didn't save me from suicide. You ambushed me. You held a gun to my head. You told me if I didn't get on the aqueous, you'd kill my father and make it look like a burglary. Elijah's mask slipped. The smooth compassion evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. Stop it, Thomas. You're not well. You kept me in the engine room, Thomas continued, stepping forward. You fed me slop. You made me fix the flaw in the sonar array, the flaw that would sink those government ships. You're not a businessman, Elijah. You're a fraud and a would-be mass murderer. The arrogance finally broke through. He laughed, a short, harsh bark. And who will believe you? A mentally unstable runaway and a senile old man. I have doctor's reports ready to be filed. I have the state police commissioner on my golf team. I own the narrative. Do you? I asked quietly. I held up the burner phone. On its screen, clear as day, was the live feed from the camera in the room. And in the corner of the feed, a viewer count. It wasn't just us watching. The stream was live on a private channel, and the link had been sent an hour ago from a secure server to 3 major news networks, the Department of Maritime Security, and the FBI tip line. Gerald's nephew, Kieran, had known a guy who knew a guy. The viewer count was 17 and climbing. Elijah's eyes darted to the phone, to the shelf, to the tiny green light he now saw in the knickknacks. His face went from smug to confused to dawning absolute horror. He understood. The narrative was no longer his. It's live, Elijah, I said. Every word. Your confession about the doctors, the police commissioner, the narrative. They're hearing it all. He stared at us, his jaw working soundlessly. The predator was caught in the Klieg lights. Panic, raw and ugly, twisted his features. Then it morphed into rage. A pure, unadulterated fury that made him seem less than human. You think this changes anything? He snarled, his voice shedding all pretense. It was guttural, venomous. I'll destroy that feed. I'll destroy you both. I'll say you attacked me. It'll be my word against 2 certified lunatics. He took a threatening step towards me, his hand dipping into his jacket pocket. But Thomas was faster. He didn't lunge at Elijah. He simply pointed to the fireplace, to the heavy iron fire poker leaning against the bricks. And then he spoke. Not to Elijah, but to the camera, to the unseen audience. He's reaching for the weapon he used to threaten me with for 4 years. The Zippo lighter isn't just a lighter. It's a model with a hidden piezoelectric stun device. He called it his persuader. Check his right jacket pocket. Elijah froze, his hand inside his pocket. He looked from Thomas to the fireplace poker, to my steady gaze. He was surrounded, outmaneuvered, and exposed. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, defeated realization. The game was up. The world was watching. The sound that escaped him was half sob, half laugh of sheer ruin. He slowly pulled his empty hand from his pocket and held it up. He sank into the armchair opposite me, the very picture of a king whose throne had just crumbled to dust. Outside, in the distance, the first faint sound of sirens began to wail, cutting through the silent night. They were coming for him. The truth had arrived, and it was wearing a blue suit and flashing lights. The sirens grew from a whine to a roar, painting the dark woods in flashes of red and blue. Elijah didn't move from the chair. He just stared into the middle distance, his empire of lies collapsing silently behind his eyes. The front door, the red door, burst open. It wasn't just local sheriff's deputies. Men and women in the crisp, dark uniforms of the FBI poured in, their movements efficient, their eyes sharp. They took in the scene. The emaciated young man, the protective old father, and the well-dressed man sitting in defeated silence. One agent, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, approached me. Sir, we received a live stream link and credible allegations. Are you unharmed? We are now, I said, my voice trembling with genuine post-adrenaline fatigue. I gestured to Thomas, who was being wrapped in a thermal blanket by a paramedic. This is my son, Thomas. He was reported dead 4 years ago. He's been held prisoner by that man. I pointed to Elijah. Elijah didn't protest. He just looked at the agent and said flatly, "I want my lawyer." As he was read his rights and led away in handcuffs, he paused at the threshold of the red door. He turned his head and looked back at me. There was no hatred left, no anger, just a profound, empty shock, as if he still couldn't comprehend how the invisible, powerless old man had orchestrated his ruin. He didn't look at Thomas at all. Then he was gone, ushered into the back of a federal vehicle. The cottage became a hive of activity. Forensics technicians, more agents taking statements, a kind-faced woman from victim services speaking softly to Thomas. Through the window, I saw news vans setting up at the end of the long driveway, their satellite dishes pointed at the stars. The camera kept streaming until an agent respectfully asked me to shut it down, as evidence was now in official hands. I did. Our trap had worked. The next 72 hours were a blur of a different kind, a whirlwind of justice, validation, and exhausting revelation. Thomas was taken to a hospital, not a prison or a mental ward. He was treated for severe malnutrition, exposure, and the deep psychological wounds of his captivity. I never left his side. The evidence was overwhelming. The audio recordings from the cottage were damning. The live stream, though cut, had been captured by several news agencies. The existence of the hidden compartment on the aqueous was confirmed. Forensics found Thomas's DNA, his fingerprints, years of his handwritten notes and sabotaged equations. The flawed sonar design was analyzed and confirmed to be catastrophically dangerous. The multi-million-dollar government contract was frozen, then voided. Elijah's house of cards fell with a speed that was breathtaking. His friends in high places vanished. The doctor's reports he'd prepared were discovered and became evidence of criminal conspiracy. The Zippo lighter, when examined, did indeed contain the modified stun device. Each piece locked into place, constructing an unassailable prison of facts around him. But the most powerful moment came 3 days later, in a sterile hospital conference room. Thomas, looking slightly stronger in a clean hospital gown, sat beside me as we gave our formal, joint statement to the lead federal prosecutor and a senior agent. Thomas recounted, in horrific, clinical detail, the 4 years of imprisonment. The cold, the hunger, the constant fear, the forced labor. When he described hearing the faint sounds of parties on the deck above his engine room prison, the prosecutor had to look away. When it was over, the agent, a hardened man in his 50s, had tears in his eyes. "Son," he said to Thomas, his voice thick, "what you endured. I've seen a lot, but that is extraordinary. Your strength is extraordinary." Then he turned to me. "And you, sir, the patience, the cunning. You took down a very dangerous man from your armchair. It's one of the most remarkable things I've ever witnessed." It wasn't a compliment I ever wanted. I just held my son's hand. "A father's love isn't just a feeling," I said quietly. "It's a fact, and facts have weight." The news cycle exploded. The story had everything: betrayal, a ghostly return, corporate fraud, a dramatic stakeout. Son returns from watery grave to expose captor. The phantom engineer and the avenging father. We didn't give interviews. We let the facts and the recordings speak for us. Our silence was more powerful than any soundbite. A week later, we were finally allowed to go home. My home. As I helped Thomas up the front steps, the same steps where a wet cap had appeared a lifetime ago, he paused, looking at the door. "It's just a door, Dad," he said softly. "No," I said, unlocking it. "It's our door. and it's open. We stepped inside. The world outside was screaming our story. But inside the house, we built a fortress of quiet. The first few weeks were about the slow, painful process of thawing. Thomas's body from the cold, and both our spirits from the long winter of lies. Healing was not a straight line. There were nights Thomas would wake up screaming, convinced he was back in the engine room, the drone of the motors in his ears. I would sit with him, holding his hand, repeating the same words. "You're home. You're safe. The door is open." Sometimes he would just shake for hours, the cold seeming to leach from his very bones. I learned to heat blankets in the dryer the way you would for a child and wrap him in warmth. The physical signs of his ordeal faded slowly. He gained weight, with color returning to his cheeks. A barber came to the house and carefully cut away the wild hair and beard. When the scissors finished, my breath caught. There he was, my Thomas. Older, yes, with lines of suffering etched too deep for a man his age. But his eyes, once hollow with terror, were beginning to clear. The genius was still there, but it was quieter, tempered by an awful knowledge. We didn't talk much about the future. The present was enough. We played chess. He still beat me effortlessly. We watched old movies. We sat on the porch in the afternoons, not speaking, just feeling the sun. A sensation he said he dreamed about for 1,260 days. The legal proceedings were a distant thunderstorm. Elijah, through his lawyers, attempted a plea deal. The evidence was so overwhelming that his only hope was to avoid the worst of the charges: attempted murder, kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud on a federal scale. The prosecutor called me. He wants to plead to lesser charges. He's offering a full, allocated confession in open court, detailing everything in exchange for a guaranteed sentence and no death penalty. I asked Thomas what he wanted. He thought for a long time, looking out at the garden. "I don't want a circus," he said finally. "I don't want to sit in a courtroom for months reliving it while he biao yen as. I want it to be over. I want his confession to be public record, so no one can ever doubt it. And I want him to never, ever see the sky as a free man again." That was our condition. Elijah would confess to every crime, in detail, on the record. In return, he would spend the rest of his life in a federal maximum security prison, with no chance of parole. The prosecutor said it was a strong deal for the state, a guaranteed, lifelong removal of a predator, and a perfect closed record. We agreed. The day of the plea hearing, we didn't go. We watched a condensed version on the news that evening. There was Elijah in a jumpsuit, shackled, a shell of the handsome, confident man who had brought me coffee. He stood before the judge and, in a monotone voice, recited his crimes. He told of the planned ambush on the lake, the gun, the imprisonment, the forced labor, the intended fraud on the government. He confirmed the existence of the doctor's reports meant to discredit us. He laid it all bare. When the judge asked him why, his answer was chilling in its simplicity. Because the idea was worth more than the man, and I wanted it all. The judge, a stern-faced woman, accepted the plea. She sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms, plus 12 years. As the marshals led him away, the camera caught his face one last time. It was empty, a vault robbed of its treasure. I turned off the TV. The house was silent. Thomas let out a long, shuddering breath, as if he'd been holding it for 4 years. "It's done," he said. "It's done," I echoed. But our story wasn't. Revenge was complete. Justice was served. Yet we were left with ourselves and the vast, scarred landscape of our relationship. We were father and son, but we were also fellow survivors of a trauma. We had to learn from each other again. One evening, Thomas came into my study. He was holding a small wrapped box. I had someone get this for me, he said, uncharacteristically shy. I opened it. Inside was a new grandfather clock, a small, beautiful desktop model. The old one in here always showed 3:47 to me, he said, his voice thick. I want to replace that time, with all the times that come after. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. We set the clock together, winding it, setting the hands to the current time. 7:15 p.m. A benign, ordinary, wonderful hour. The past was not erased. The wound would always be there. But it was finally, truly, beginning to close. Months flowed into a year. The news vans left for other tragedies. The world moved on. Thomas and I were left in our quiet eddy, but the water was no longer stagnant. A current, slow but sure, began to pull us forward. Thomas's mind, the brilliant engine that had been used for destruction and then survival, needed a purpose. He couldn't go back to Aquasphere. The company was being dismantled, its assets seized or sold. The very field of marine tech was tainted for him. One day, he was tinkering in the garage, and I found him taking apart an old broken radio. His hands, which had once designed complex sonar arrays, were carefully tracing the circuits of the simple device. A small smile played on his lips. What are you doing? I asked. Listening, he said. Just listening to how it works. It's straightforward, honest. That was the seed. He began volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic electronics to kids from tough neighborhoods. He was a natural. The patience born of his own ordeal made him a gentle, incredible teacher. The kids, who knew nothing of his past, just saw a cool, quiet guy who could make a robot out of a toothbrush and showed them respect. They called him Teach. It was the greatest title he'd ever been given. He used a small portion of the financial settlement from the civil case against Elijah's seized assets to start a foundation. Not a flashy one. It was called the Open Door Foundation. It provided scholarships for vocational tech training and funded safe houses for victims of coercion and kidnapping. He said he didn't want to be the face of it. He wanted the foundation to be the door others could walk through when they escaped their own cold rooms. As for me, I wrote down the entire story, not for publication, but for us. A testament, a way of placing the horror outside of ourselves, onto paper, where we could close the cover. The act of writing it was like drawing poison from a wound. Sometimes Thomas would read a passage and correct a detail. The pipe was on the left, Dad, not the right. We would talk about it, calmly, the way one might discuss a difficult movie. The story was becoming history, not a living nightmare. One spring afternoon, we were by the small pond at the back of our property. Thomas was skipping stones, a skill he'd taught the kids at the center. He turned to me, the sun on his face. He still looked too thin, and the shadows in his eyes would never fully leave. But there was light there now, too. I've been thinking, he said, about the flaw, the one in the sonar. My heart clenched. Thomas, you don't have to. I fixed it, he said simply. In my head, while I was there. The real fix. Not the sabotaged one I gave Elijah. It's elegant. It would work. He picked up another stone, weighed it in his hand. I'm not giving it to the government, or to any corporation. I'm going to patent it myself. Open source it. Release the design for free to any accredited research vessel, any oceanographic institute, any non-profit doing conservation or search and rescue. Let the good that was in that idea finally get out into the world. Without a price tag. I looked at my son, at the man who had refused to let his genius be corrupted, even in chains. He wasn't just surviving, he was redeeming. Not just himself, but the very work that had been used to enslave him. The poison of betrayal had been deep. The revenge had been necessary, a surgery to remove the rot. But this was the healing. This was the new current. It wasn't about forgetting the cold, dark water. It was about learning to sail again on our own terms, in the sunlight. The grandfather clock in the hall, the real one, not the desktop version, struck the hour with its deep, resonant chime. It was 3 p.m., not 3:47 a.m. The sound was no longer a herald of dread, but a marker of ordinary, precious time. It has been several years now. The script of our lives has been rewritten in a quieter, truer font. Thomas runs the Open Door Foundation full-time. He met someone, a kind, no-nonsense social worker named Lena, who sees the hero past his scars and loves the gentleman he is now. They're getting married next fall. He asked me to be his best man. I said I've been practicing for that role since the day he was born. I still have the blue cap. It's no longer a piece of evidence or a ghostly token. It's washed, clean, and sits on a shelf in my study, next to a picture of Thomas and Lena, and one of him surrounded by his students, all holding their homemade robots. It is a relic of a war we survived. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, I still wake up. Old habits. I'll pad to the doorway of Thomas's old room, now his office when he visits. I'll see him asleep on the couch in there, having worked too late, Lena's cat curled on his chest. I'll stand there for a moment, listening to his steady breathing, the proof of life. The phone never rings at 3:47 a.m. This is not a story about a ghost. It is a story about a silence that was broken. It is a story about how love, when it is real and fierce, is not a passive feeling. It is a weapon against lies. It is a shelter against the cold. It is a signal that can pierce through any static, any darkness, any engineered silence. They say vengeance is a dish best served cold. But I have learned that justice, true justice, is warm. It is the warmth of a reclaimed home. It is the warmth of the sun on your face after a long imprisonment. It is the warmth in your son's eyes when he looks at you, not with the haunted fear of a prisoner, but with the quiet peace of a free man. The moral is not simply that crime doesn't pay. It's that some bonds cannot be severed by greed or violence. The bond between a parent and a child, forged in love and tested in fire, is a fact of the universe as immutable as gravity. You can try to bury it, hide it, deny it, but it remains, waiting. And when it speaks, even with a whisper from the deepest dark, it has the power to shake foundations, to expose monsters to the light, and to open doors that were meant to be sealed forever. So listen. Listen to the silences in your own life. What truths are they hiding? And never, ever believe that a story is over just because someone powerful has written the ending. Sometimes, the most powerful author is the one who simply refuses to stop believing, and who has the courage, no matter how old or frail, to turn the page and begin the next chapter. For Thomas and me, the clock chimes on, and every chime is a gift we almost lost. Every hour is a world we fought to get back. And every day, every single, ordinary, beautiful day, the door's open.